Franchise show. I hope you're all doing well. You've had a good week in franchising. I've had a lovely week, mostly because I've been on holiday, but I had to come back a couple of days ago and it was back to reality for me. I think that's an Eminem lyric, isn't it? But look, I hope you're all doing well. So where do we always begin? We always begin by explaining what this thing is all about. And it's the franchise show. And you might have guessed it's about franchising, but it's also about a heck of a lot more than that. If you are a franchisee or a franchisor or an entrepreneur, then hopefully you can get some real value from these conversations. It's very interactive. It's live. If it is June 25th and 5:15 GMT, it's live. If not, you're watching it in the future. So, but if you are here live, please comment because this show is all about you. So what do we do? Every week we take a different topic and we have a bit of a deep delve into that. And we have a lovely guest. And this week is no exception. We have a lovely guest. And the topic this week is franchise contracts and agreements. Not particularly sexy as a topic, but hopefully we are going to have some fun and also find out a little bit more about what you should be looking out for in these things, and have a good conversation. So without further ado, I'd love to introduce our lovely guest. And I'm sure most of you will know Natalia Shvarts. That's me pronouncing her surname and hopefully getting it right. It's great to have you. It's great to have you with us on the franchise show, Natalia. Perhaps I know most people will know you, but perhaps you could introduce yourself and what it is you do and how you've come to be where you're at while I put some of these lovely people on the screen.
Sure. Thanks, Harvey. And absolutely delighted to be here in this hot seat. So yes, my name is Natalia. It's hot today. I am a franchise solicitor. I suppose what makes me probably slightly unusual is that I haven't always been in private practice, so not in a law firm. I started in a law firm. I then spent 7 years in-house at a large franchisor. So I really had an opportunity to see what it's like for a franchisor organization. And that is definitely, a very different experience. So having done that, I felt that it gave me such an insight into how, franchisors operate and the sort of decision making that goes on behind the scenes, and also to really understand franchisees. Because when you're in a law firm as a lawyer, you don't, you get to know your clients, but you don't get to know them to that extent as when you are, a franchisor. So it was really, really great to understand what the franchisee journey looks like as well. And because of that, I felt that actually me coming back into private practice would be a benefit to everyone, because I would be able to bring that experience with me and work differently with my clients going forward, which is exactly what I've done. So I've been back in private practice for 3 years now, I think. Time just runs away. And January this year, I went solo and joined Excello Law, who support me in providing my legal practice. So yes, exciting times.
Fantastic. Great introduction. Thank you very much for that. Before we get into things today, let's have a look at who's with us early on today. So we have Robert, or Bob, as we have come to know him. Great to have you here, Bob. Looking forward to hearing your thoughts on contracts and agreements. Bob's over in the US of A. So things are a little different there, but great to hear your thoughts as to how that affects the process and, and what you should be thinking about as a franchisor or a franchisee in terms of contracts and agreements. We have Katrina Newman, another QFP as well. So we've doubled up the QFPs so far. But great to have you here, Katrina. And Katrina's put hello, Harvey and Natalia and franchise friends. We have the wonderful Johnny Joseph. And he's put welcome to the show, everybody, from a very warm and sunny Los Angeles. Well, it sounds lovely. It's warm and sunny in the UK. It's one of the only times I can compete with the warm and sunny Los Angeles. But great to have you here, Johnny. Looking forward to hearing your thoughts on agreements. Johnny is a franchise auditor. We have the ever wise Simon Wise. Now he's put Ola, franchise friends. Now that is a clue as to where Simon is. Last couple of weeks, I was in sunny climes in Lanzarote, and Simon is also away on holiday. So thank you for sparing the time to be with us, and hopefully you're having a lovely time. We have Barry Price here. Great to have you, Barry. Good afternoon, folks. He's put, really looking forward to hearing your thoughts on franchise agreements and contracts. Now we have Jitin. Jitin was a franchisee, aged just 22, and he's put good afternoon, Harvey and Natalia and franchise friends. And there's lots of emojis there. I'm a big fan of an emoji, as you know, because I created one just for me. And we have, thank you, Louise, because we, for some reason, it doesn't come up. But Louise has put hello from Louise Harris in a warm and sunny England. Now she's got a question, so we're going to get into this. And we'll get into it right now. I'm interested in your thoughts on getting franchisees to have their agreement checked by a BFA franchise lawyer, but then saying we won't change anything. This is a great point, okay, because as a franchisee, and we're going to get very much into the two sides of this, but as a franchisee, really, are you looking at this agreement as something that you just need to understand, or are you looking at this agreement as something you need to negotiate? It's a good point and a great question. Thanks for that, Louise.
Absolutely. So absolutely fantastic question. And for me, I always make it very clear to my clients, it is exactly that this is not about renegotiating the franchise agreement. This is about understanding what they're about to sign. And I think it's crucial because that sort of at the outset, if the prospective franchisee, especially if they're new to franchising, if they don't understand how it works, that can often lead to problems because they're coming to it and they've got no experience or background. You don't know how much research they've done, how much time they've spent getting to understand franchising. And franchising is different from how other businesses, how non-franchised setups work. So when somebody gets into it and doesn't get that advice and doesn't understand what is standard or not standard, and doesn't understand sort of the restrictions that might be in the franchise agreement, and then that comes up, they suddenly find out later, often that's a surprise, and often that's a negative surprise. So I think for me, it's about setting expectations, making sure that the prospective franchisee are very clear on what it is that they're signing and what it is that they will be expecting. So it's about setting expectations right at the outset. So I would always recommend that franchisees do go and get legal advice. I think the reason we direct people to BFA affiliated lawyers is because those who are affiliated to the BFA obviously have the relevant experience. Because frankly, if you go to a lawyer who is not familiar with franchising, it's going to cost you a lot, and it's going to, and their report is not going to be very useful to you, because it will say, this is awful, don't sign this is really restrictive. But the point is, franchise agreements need to be that way, and mostly, those type of things that non-franchise lawyers would look at and think, oh my God, that's awful. Those are the things that are quite standard. So it is important to go to, an expert, to a specialist, to someone who has dealt with franchising before, and not just once, but on a regular basis, and who understands what is and isn't industry standard, and best practice.
It's really, yeah, thank you so much for that answer. And thank you, Louise, for that question. A great question and thought-provoking. Natalia, you mentioned there about things that a non-franchise lawyer would find awful. You use that exact expression, in fact. Give me an example of what you mean by that, because if somebody is new to franchising here, a prospective franchisee, and hears that, it might be something that really fills them with a lot of concern. How would you alleviate that in terms of what you've just said?
Yeah, so it goes back to, understanding the sector and understanding why things are different from, non-franchise contracts and relationships. And, and it's because the franchisor has spent a lot of time and money and effort in developing the system, in developing the business, in, protecting the intellectual property. And of course, the franchisor needs to have that control, because ultimately it's their brand on the line, it's their reputation on the line. So when the franchisee comes in, they're essentially borrowing the franchisor's branding and setup for a period of time. So the franchisor has a lot to lose if the franchisee does something that's, that's not in line with how the business should be operated. So yes, the franchisee should be protected, but the franchisor needs certain protections as well. So the franchisor has the freedom to, has the right to dictate that the business must be operated in a certain way. The franchisor must be able to check, to have quality control rights. The franchisor will be able to say, you cannot be involved in a competing business. And that's understandable, because, why would you as a franchisor allow your franchisee to have access to all this confidential information and then allow them to go and be involved in the competing business? It just it just doesn't make sense. So there are certain things that in a non-franchise context might be seen as restrictive, but because it's a franchise setup, it is standard. So yeah, I would, and I think getting legal advice protects everyone. So absolutely.
No, fantastic. Thanks for that. I mean, Simon's put here, it's a business to business relationship before, during, and after, and many do not appreciate this. I think that's it, isn't it? It's a different type of contract at a different setup. I think many people may perhaps say that it's in favor of the franchisor in some way. It's set up to protect the franchisor. How would you deal with that as an argument? Do you think that it is skewed to just protect the franchisor, or does it give a franchisee a similar sort of protection in this business to business relationship?
Well, it will always be skewed or one-sided in favor of the franchisor, but that's because it needs to be. And again, it's the reason for that. And actually, I always look at that and think, but actually, it's in a way it's a protection for franchisee as well. Because when you're buying into a franchise network, right? So you are just about to spend a lot of money investing in a business. You do that, you choose to go down the franchising route because you want to save some time on, instead of reinventing the wheel. You see a business that's great, that's got the reputation, that's got the developed systems, etc., and you want to be part of that. So the franchisor saves you time and money by providing you with the system and certain components. So by the franchise agreement being restrictive, and it means that the franchisor is able to control all franchisees equally, and if I'm a franchisee, that would give me some comfort knowing that the fact that I'm not allowed to do certain things means that my neighbors, my other, other franchisees are not allowed to do the same things. That means that everyone is following the system and everyone is doing the same thing, right? So the brand, it's about protection of the brand. So the brand is protected, the business as a whole is protected, because often it's when you have a franchisee who, every now and then you will have a franchisee who maybe, steps outside, of the norms. Every franchisor at some point will have a bad apple. And that can potentially damage not just the franchisor, but all the other franchisees. So it's in everyone's interest for that, for the franchise agreement and for the franchise setup to be robust, so that the franchisor can protect the brand for everyone's benefit.
Yeah, I like that. I like the fact that an agreement and a contract is about protecting the brand. And by protecting the brand, you're protecting something that you've bought. As a franchisee, you've bought into a brand and you've decided that that brand is something that will add value. So you would want that protected. So it's a good way of looking at it. And hopefully by understanding the agreement and the contract, by going to the appropriate professional person for that advice, you can understand and see where that is protecting the brand and therefore where it's protecting you. We've got a couple of other questions. We've got one coming up from Simon, and we've got a comment here on the screen from Johnny. And let's take this comment from Johnny. Johnny's put, please share with us if you've had any royalties litigation issues and describe them and their resolution, if so. Yeah, I mean, Johnny is a franchise auditor, and royalties are clearly something that he has to look at in detail in his job. Once people understand an agreement and a contract, do you find that it's commonplace for there to be royalties problems in the collection and litigation there?
Well, let me start by saying that I'm not a litigator, so that's just putting it out there. So, I go as far as sort of helping my clients resolve any potential situations where there might be conflict, but I would not profess to be an expert in that, and would leave that to my litigation colleagues who are experts in that. But in my experience, I've not experienced many issues to do with that specifically, because typically, from sort of what I've seen is obviously the fees need to be set out in the franchise agreement, and they must be very clear. When you're signing up, you need to understand what it is that you will be paying, not just at the outset, but through the life of the franchise agreement. So, and certainly if there are any fees that are sort of phrased as refer to the manual or to be determined or anything like that, I would flag that up as that's an issue, because you need to be able to to know how much you will be paying at any one time and what what your exposure is. And in terms of royalties, they typically tend to be a percentage of revenue, or and or a fixed amount. So I'm not aware of there being many issues with that, unless Johnny, you refer to sort of franchisees who don't declare everything, which I think is a slightly different question. But
yeah, sure. Yeah. I mean, I think it's a great question, Johnny, and I think litigation is something that we're probably going to have as a topic in the future. So we can probably delve a little bit deeper into that in one of those episodes. I think today is more about perhaps understanding what it is that you're getting into. What it is that you're signing up to, what benefits that you're going to have, what responsibilities you're going to have, and trying to take that from perhaps some legal terminology that it's a bit tricky to kind of understand to something that really you can get around in your own head. Let's have a look now at a comment from Simon, the ever wise Simon Wise. Natalia, what's your view on franchise legislation in the UK right now? I mean, we've always got a US UK audience here on the Franchise Show, so there's always a great debate on the legislation and the regulations in the industry. What's your take on things here in the UK at the moment?
Well, I mean, again, I suppose it all comes down to what you define as franchise legislation. And I suppose, we don't have here in the UK, we don't have one piece of legislation that is, that's sort of branded as a franchise legislation, but it's contract law. It's it's then we've got in intellectual property. There are various regulations and laws. We've got consumer legislation that affects some of the businesses and their paperwork. So there are so many, and there are so many different pieces of legislation. There's data protection. There's competition law, of course. So I think the truth is we are quite well covered by all the other, franchising just works as it is because it's covered by so many different acts and pieces of legislation. I think legislation tends to be introduced because there is a need for it, and we clearly, don't have a gap that needs to be addressed. So do we, what's my view? I think it works really well as it is. And I think it gives us the freedom to be responsive and to have a really good, business environment. So to be honest, and I think with the BFA as well, the code of ethics, the sector is pretty well, managed. So
yeah, absolutely. I mean, obviously, in the US, in terms of FDDs, you have a more regulated environment, and here in the UK, the contract and the agreement, almost goes towards being our version of that. It is perhaps coming at a different stage of the process. I mean, that's maybe a question. Where should looking at the contract come into the decision-making process if you're a franchisee? Should that come in right at the beginning, or should that be further down the line?
Well, I think that's a great question. Absolutely a great question, because my view is that it's definitely part of your due diligence, right? It absolutely, the franchise agreement has to be part of your due diligence as a franchisee. Where in that comes in, certainly not the very, I think it certainly should be given to you, to a franchisee in plenty of time to have time to go and get legal advice, B, to be able to sort of look at it, read it, understand it, and consider it. And for me, if the franchise agreement doesn't match with everything else the franchisee has seen, if it doesn't match with the feeling they get from all the conversations, then there is a disconnect somewhere. So, I think it definitely plays a part. I think, the earlier you get it, the better, because then you have more time. Should it be the first document you get? Probably not, because it wouldn't make much sense. But there's certainly a place for it.
No, that's great. It's interesting to know where that should come, and thanks for your thoughts on that. Let's just recognise a couple of people that we didn't recognise earlier on because they joined us a little bit later. So we have the wonderful Donald Cohen, and Don taught me everything I know about LinkedIn Live. So if you like what I do, please check out Don's show and talk to Don, because he is a expert on LinkedIn Live and a truly lovely chap, and it's great to have you here. I also want to recognize the fact that Tim has joined us. And of course, Tim does a lovely podcast with Natalia and Kevin. It's a fantastic thing. So please check that out when you can. It's the Fran Chat podcast. And he's put evening Harvey and Natalia, a bit late to the party, but looking forward to this. Well, great to have you here, and you're welcome to join us at any time. Before we get into, we've got a few other good questions coming up. Before we get into that, this is the Franchise Show, and today we are talking to Natalia, and we are talking all about contracts and agreements and what you should be considering when you are looking at franchising, whether you're a franchisor or whether you're a franchisee. So it's great to have Natalia with us, and it's a fantastic conversation to have. I'd also like to introduce the fact that we have a lovely new sponsor. I'm frantically trying to change all of these things at the same time as talking. Look at me multitasking. But it's Elite Franchise, and everyone knows Elite Franchise. They do the lovely awards where we celebrate franchise success. And in fact, I think beginning of August, the process opens. So if you want to celebrate your own franchise success, please contact Elite to do that. And our other lovely sponsors will be flashing up all over the place during this conversation. So let's get back into this and see what other things we've got coming in here. We've just recognized Tim. Let's get a question from Tim. If franchisors are looking to expand internationally, should they create new agreements for each national jurisdiction they are in, and therefore have legal representation in each country? That's a good question. What's your thoughts on expanding internationally and contracts and agreements?
Sure. Well, I mean, I think you've touched on this earlier, Harvey. Is that, every country has its own laws and regulations, right? So when expanding internationally, absolutely necessary to do research and to find out what franchising looks like in that country. And so I wouldn't necessarily say you need to you need to come up with a different agreement for each country. But what franchisors typically do is they would use their template. So say if it's a UK franchisor, so the UK franchisor would use their UK template and then get legal advice in the target country. Because as you said, going into US, there is disclosure, there are different laws, and you need to make sure that your franchise agreement is fit for purpose there. In some other countries, there are requirements to translate franchise agreements, so they need to be bilingual. In some countries, there are requirements that text has to be side by side. So you literally have one language and then another language as you go through the document. So there are different things depending on where you're going. And I would certainly, I would not try to create an agreement for a different country. So I would usually introduce, if my clients are looking to go overseas, I would introduce them to an expert in that country and leave them in capable hands of that expert.
Sounds good. I mean, you touched there about taking sort of the agreement and maybe working from that. Gittins, and in fact, I think Simon, I'm going to put up both of these comments while we have this conversation, but let's put up Gittins first. Gittins put here, Natalia, do you have franchisors approaching you with a skeleton template for an agreement from the outset, or do you tend to always start with a blank canvas and guide a client towards what is legally fair to all parties, taking into consideration their industry and sector? Good question. Is there a sort of a template? And I think I'm going to put up Simon's one because I think it's similar. Would you agree that off-the-shelf franchise agreements and other templates documentation is a huge pitfall that any prospective franchisor should be wary of? Yeah, two similar things here. What's your thoughts here? Should it be a template, or should we start from scratch?
Good question. Absolutely great question. So, and templates, agreeing with Simon Wise that yes, using templates is a dangerous thing to do, because you don't know what that template was based on, what it was for. It might not be appropriate for you and your business. So Jitten, back to your question, it very much depends on whether, who the client is and what they're looking for. So I have had situations where clients come to me, they are existing franchisors, they already have a franchise agreement. So in that case, they come to me and it's a conversation of, what is it that you would like me to do? Do you want me to, review it and see whether, it can be improved or updated? Is there anything that doesn't work? So, let's talk about it. What have you found, in your experience as a franchisor? What's worked, what's not worked? Where have you had issues? So that's sort of my approach with existing franchisors who already have documents. With brand new franchisors who are looking to get into franchising, for me, it's always, I always first have a conversation. I never ever jump into anything without getting to know that franchisor and their business. Because for me, it's important to understand them and to understand how their business works, what's important, and also, I suppose, for me, it's an opportunity to understand where are they at with their franchise journey, because you don't know what you don't know, right? So maybe, so if I can guide them on their journey, I absolutely will. So in that sense, my process is that I have a questionnaire, and that questionnaire covers sort of everything that I feel I need to cover with my client. And then on the back of that questionnaire, and as a result of our conversations, I will then prepare a draft. And so obviously there will be things that are standard, because if you look at the code of ethics and you look at any franchise agreement, there are things that that you will see the patterns and you will see the type of clauses, and there are things that have to be covered. But how it's covered and what goes and where it goes, absolutely, my view needs to be tailored to that business, because it needs to work for that business. And because no two businesses are the same, and even within the same industry, we might work in different ways. So it's for a good franchise agreement that really works and protects the franchisor and the brand and the business, it needs to be properly tailored to that franchisor. So do we always start from scratch with a blank piece of paper? No, because we have, as lawyers especially, we have certain, clauses, certain templates, but they're not templates from the, they're not internet templates. They're our things that we have developed. But I absolutely tailor it to each client.
Fantastic. No, great advice. I like there about what you said about understanding that business first, understanding the aims. What is the aim of this agreement? We've spoken about the fact that it should be protecting the brand, and by protecting the brand, you're protecting all parties. So understanding what it is, what it's meant to be doing as an agreement. And I think there is a danger of templates, because they can just be skewed perhaps a little bit over the years of cutting and pasting, and it's great advice there. Let's have a look at a few other comments. So we've got Barry Price from the Bike Fitters. Great to have you here, Barry. Simon Wise, I agree with this. Interestingly, we had a look at an AI agreement. It was created in 2 seconds and cost nothing. Wow. Well, this is very interesting. I mean, AI is coming into our lives in all sorts of ways. And, it's a tool like, spell check as an example. When spell check came in, we use it as a tool. but I think with all tools, it needs to be used carefully. And I think this is a good example. Does AI have a place in?
Well, Javi, just actually, I think it's a really good example when you talk about spell check, because you can have a word that's spelled correctly, but it's the wrong word for what you're trying to say, right? So, and the same with AI, right? I mean, I have nothing against AI. I think we absolutely need to embrace it. There is absolutely a place for it, but we do need to take care with it, because AI takes all available information. Doesn't mean to say it's all correct available information. So that there is a reason why there is a reason why we have lawyers, and of course not all lawyers are the same. But for me, anything that makes my job easier and saves me time and my clients money, I will absolutely always embrace it, because that means that I have more time to focus and on my relationship with my clients, and make sure that I can help them in a way that really helps them and their businesses. But yeah, it's templates are dangerous.
I think it's really interesting to hear you say that about spell check, that it can be spelt correctly, but it might not be the right word. And there are those in the nuances of language, and that is where you're perhaps as a expert lawyer, you're trying to help someone describe what it is they want to do in the language of law, and it can be tricky. We've got a few fantastic comments coming in here, so let's take one right now. Oh, I will say before we move on, Barry did add this. They didn't use it. So it was a great, and you know what, Barry, this is what this show's all about. It's about inspiring thought and questions, right? And that's exactly what you just did there. Someone might think, oh, well, could we use that? And maybe there's elements where it might work, but it's certainly not something that should be relied on. So that's a fantastic point to raise. Let's have a look at this question here from Simon, see what he's got to say. Do you need to update your agreement on a regular basis in the light of any case law, for example? This is a really good question. If you did your franchise agreement 10 years ago, 20 years ago, how often should that be reviewed?
Very good question. Well, to be honest with you, we don't really have that many cases that change franchising, to that level. So there are certainly cases where we need to learn from, and there are, obviously life changes all the time. There are developments, law changes, right? So if there is a change in law, I would say absolutely you need to review your franchise agreement, and if necessary, update it. So in my experience, so I've been in the franchising industry for just over 16 years. I would say a franchise agreement needs to be looked at on a regular basis, but updated probably once every 5 years. There may be a need for change. But even then, it's, the changes may not necessarily be huge or significant. And if your franchise agreement was written by a franchise lawyer and is a good agreement in the first place, it would probably still be okay, because a lot of things that come from case law are more about interpretation. Very rarely they change, like say, very rarely they're sort of life changing in terms of having to rewrite something. But certainly, yeah, there are lessons to how we should approach things.
Yeah, no, fantastic, and great question there, Simon. Let's have a look at a question here from Tim. Before we do this, if you have just joined us today, this is the Franchise Show, and today we are discussing franchise contracts and agreements with the lovely Natalia Shvarts. Hopefully I pronounced that right again. Doing my very best here. And look, it's the lovely Tim, and Tim has put, you have in-house legal experience. what advantage do you feel that brings to any discussion with franchisors you work with? There's a good question. You have hands-on experience, I guess, but what's your thoughts on that?
Yes, good question. Gosh. Well, you know what? I would say the biggest lessons for me are that it's about, I mean, franchising, it's all about people, right? And it's really understanding that everybody goes through a journey, and it's more about really people and franchisee management, really. So it's the fact that actually, you know what, if a franchisee, if there is an issue, often um, the issue that franchisees shout about and not the issue. There can often be sometimes something in the background that's the real issue that is hiding behind a fake issue. So it's sort of really differentiating between those things and figuring it out. Um, but understanding that franchisors go through a journey and franchisees go through a journey, and how those journeys sort of intersect. But it's for me, it's the ability to really to be able to bring that practical experience of dealing with challenges, or dealing with implementing big projects. How is best to do that? How do franchisees react? How you can use franchise exchange councils in order, to get the most out of your network, and to benefit your business.
What are
So,
franchise exchange councils?
so franchise exchange council, franchise. There's another term we use that just escapes my.
Is this just where people sort of talk to each other franchisees speaking to one another?
No, it's typically sort of a group that is selected to represent the views of the whole network.
Okay.
So franchisors use them in different ways. So sometimes you sort of create, you can create sort of committees, for specific things. Sometimes they're sort of more general.
Fantastic. No, that's fantastic. I'm going to take a comment here by Simon. And Simon's put, do you work side by side with the ops manual creator? And conveniently enough, we have the lovely Penny Hopkinson's book in the corner there. And Penny is one of our lovely sponsors, and I always bring her book up, and it's all about ops manuals. So if you're looking at that, please contact Penny on the number flashing along the bottom of the screen. But what's your thought, Natalia, about contracts and agreements working alongside perhaps something that people would consider as the next stage of things, that ops manual, and how you do things?
Well, actually, I would probably say that ops manual almost comes first. The franchise agreement and ops manual absolutely need to work side by side. And it's sort of always a chicken and egg situation. Which one should you do first, ops manual or the franchise agreement? The truth is, the franchise agreement will always refer to the ops manual a lot, right? And it's because the franchise agreement cannot contain all the detail. So the practical detail of how to do things should be set out in the ops manual. So ops manual is hugely important, but equally where you can run into issues is if your franchise agreement says, see the ops manual, and then you go to the ops manual and it's not in your ops manual. That's when you run into issues. So the important thing is that once the ops manual is done, you then absolutely need to check the franchise agreement, and every time it refers to the ops manual, you need to go back to the ops manual and make sure that the ops manual covers that, and that detail is indeed in the ops manual. So to answer your question, Simon, do I work side by side with ops manual creators? Sadly, probably not as much as I would like to. But I've certainly have worked with, have clients where I've worked, I've gone through their manuals to make sure that, the franchise agreement is right. And, when we were sort of the ops manual again is a document that needs to be a live document, so it needs to be updated. So it works both ways. You sort of need to make sure that both documents sit side by side.
Fantastic. Great answer to that question. And I think which came first, ops manual or agreement? Sounds like a great title for a show. We get you and Penny on for that one. But no, that's fantastic. A comment's come in here from Bob, and we are drawing towards the end, but it's interested me, so I want to put this one up actually. Bob's put, is there any legal reason to have the new franchisee initial each page of the agreement versus just a single signature at the end? Any legal difference? That's an interesting one, isn't it? Why do we have to do that with every page? Is it so that they don't slip a page out, or what's the reason?
Well, I don't really see many agreements. I must say, I've not seen many agreements where you have to initial every page. I think, again, it just comes back to practical, what we do in practice, right? And now that we've moved more towards digital signing, I actually think it's much better, because once a contract is signed via one of the digital platforms, you can't manipulate it. So there goes the question of, if you wanted to manipulate a document, you can't do it. So the document is the document. I think in the past, it would be possible to have a franchise agreement that appears to have been signed, but actually pages could have been swapped. So it then just goes back to proving which version is the final complete version and the real version. But I think if you get to that point, the relationship is really broken down if that is happening.
Yes, absolutely. No, great question, Bob, and thanks for putting it on there as one that I think I had as well. So, and thank you for answering that as well. Just quickly put up Louise's comment here. Louise again, love the ops manual question, of course. Well, another ops manual expert there as well. So write it, prepare the agreement, check it, and keep checking. Absolutely. Absolutely fantastic comment there, Louise. Thanks for that. Do you know, have we got time for one more? I'm sorry if you've put a question and we haven't got time to include it. We'll have to have a round two on this one, I'm absolutely sure. But let's go for one more from Simon. Renewal provisions, fees are sometimes a bone of contention. Any thoughts? Yeah, I mean, it's like you said, it's understanding what you are signing and what you are agreeing to, and if there is after 5 years a renewal fee, you've got to understand that is something that's going to come into play. What's your thoughts on this?
Yeah, absolutely. And Simon, thank you for a great question. So a couple of things there. So renewal provisions are very, very important, and it's important to understand, what they are. Obviously, renewal is subject to criteria, so it's not automatic or guaranteed. But then again, we see things like you only have the right to no more than 2 renewals. Well, if the franchisee is doing really well, why would franchisor not continue to renew? It's sort of, for me, it's a mutual benefit relationship, right? So commercially, for a franchisor, you've got a franchisee who's doing really well. Why would you not grant another renewal? And in terms of fees, I would go back to sort of BFA Code of Ethics and what that says about fees. And again, if your franchisee are doing well, you're renewing, they will be continuing to pay you a percentage. So you are, you as a franchisor will be making money, and it needs to be a mutual benefit. The franchisee needs to also be making money. So for me, a renewal, charging a fee seems unnecessary. So absolutely, it's okay for you to recoup your costs. So if there are any sort of admin or legal costs concerned with renewal, that's absolutely fine. But a separate fee,
Mm. Mm.
Why? What's the logic behind that? Because the
Yeah.
franchisee continues to pay the management service fee, royalty, whatever you like to call it. So,
Mm. It's a very interesting question. It's certainly something that needs to be looked at when you're making your decisions or when you're trying to keep happy, successful franchisees. We are definitely now drawing to an end. Let's quickly put up a couple of sort of farewell ones on the screen there. Barry's put, excellent, Natalia. Thanks for taking our minds off the fact that England are playing tonight. That shows it's live right now. And Simon has put, off for a cerveza. Oh, a cerveza sounds very nice to me. I don't know many other languages, but I do know that means beer. So multilingual when it comes to beer, I am. Great show. Looking forward to brand stories on Thursday. Well, actually, that brings me to the conclusion of today, and I will let you know who's going to be on brand stories on Thursday. But before I do, if I could just give you a chance, Natalia, to give your sort of final thoughts and also let our lovely viewers know where the best place is to get hold of you if they want to speak to you.
Yes, absolutely. Well, final thoughts. Well, thanks. Thanks for having me on. Thanks everyone for your questions and comments. It's been a great discussion. You can find me on LinkedIn. I don't know too many other Natalia Shvarts around, so do find me. You can always also find me via the BFA website. I'm on there as well. So yeah, get in touch.
Great, fantastic. So talking of franchising brand stories, our wonderful sister show, where we get to hear what's under the hat of some of the top brands. I love doing that. Some of the top brands in the UK and in the world. And this Thursday, we are going to be speaking to the lovely Deborah Salisbury from The Reading Doctor. So really looking forward to hearing the story behind that brand. So please join us Thursday, 5:15 GMT, 12:15 EST. And next week on the Franchise Show, we are speaking to Gary Chatwin, and we're going to be speaking about franchise funding. So it's going to be a great conversation, and I think something that's really valid to help people look at what options are open there and what sort of funding is available for a franchisee. So that's going to be a great conversation. Looking forward to that. That is next Tuesday, 5:15 GMT and 12:15 EST. And we're finished by putting up Scott's comment, and he put really great insights here, great discussion. We need to start reporting on these for elite franchise. Well, absolutely you do. It's great. I want to, as ever, say thank you to the wonderful people that have been here today. It's a real honor to have you spend this hour with us and to share your thoughts on these topics. It really is what makes this show what it is. So I thank you from the bottom of my heart for joining us. And I also want to thank Natalia for spending your time with us today and for being such a splendid and wonderful guest. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you as well.
Thank you.
So until next time, my friends, have a fantastic week ahead, and we'll see you next time.